Everybody loves seeing the sexy veggie displays, the greenhouses, the perfect rows of food, but almost nobody knows the mistakes that got me here. Today I'm sharing with you my top failures as a farmer and the lessons I've learned to make the farm way more profitable. If you're into farming and want more real-life wins and failures from a year-round market farmer, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. I post new videos every week about how you can grow more food, earn more money, and skip the mistakes that I've made. I'm Zach Buckle. I'm a year-round veggie farmer in Cody, Wyoming with zero farming experience before 2020. Last year, we grew over $85,000 of food from this half-acre plot of land, but we've also failed far more times than I can count. So back in 2023, we started our first veggie box program throughout the summer, where we sold 14 people a 12-week portion of veggies that they prepaid for in the spring. And we started it July 4th. But what I found out was in my season, July 4th is too early to deliver a lot of the crops that we typically sell at our farmers market. So the first 3 weeks of that veggie box share delivery, I was basically scrambling to get anything put into the 9 portions of vegetables that each customer is supposed to get every week. So we ended up selling mostly things like kale, like you see behind me, in those first couple shares, and had to profusely apologize to the customers because the variety of what I wanted was just not there. So we ended up moving the veggie box start date back in our season to July 21st, when a lot more of our field crops are ready. And the lesson I learned here was under-promise and over-deliver. We over-promised by starting the veggie box July 4th, but by just moving it back a couple weeks, it allows us to deliver a much better variety of vegetables for our customers and gives us a little bit more breathing room to be able to produce things on a good time schedule. So back in 2022, we had our first successful winter crop of spinach in this very greenhouse. And we kept it alive all winter and harvested it pretty well. But by February, I started to notice a little bit of aphids show up in the center of the leaves. And I had never really dealt with aphids yet on the farm. And by March, all of the spinach leaves were covered in aphids because they were really happy underneath all of the frost cover you see behind me and staying warm all winter. So they had a really nice home to multiply. So I ended up having to rip out every bit of spinach in March because it was just so bad. It was unsellable. The leaves were covered, slimy, disgusting. And we just ended up having to replant something after we added beneficial insects, because when you have aphids that bad, you can't just spray soap on it or something like that. You have to have beneficials or something. And so that cost us thousands of dollars in crop loss right there. And so what I've done ever since is the first time I see aphids, I add beneficial insects. So at the first sign of aphids, add stuff like ladybugs, lacewings, aphidious wasps. If you're in a special greenhouse environment and you know what type of aphid you have, you can send a sample of that aphid to a lab and they'll tell you what kind of aphidious wasp to get that will lay eggs inside the aphid and actually win the war against the aphids. And then the balance of predators to prey is much better throughout the rest of your growing season. So you're looking at the end result of my biggest farm failure of my career. This is the end of our irrigation line for the entire farm. And in 2021, we dug a 6-foot trench to bury 7 farm hydrants just like this throughout the farm to be able to irrigate the entire farm. And I had zero plumbing experience. I had contracted a guy to help me dig the 6-foot trench with an excavator that was a total pro at that. But in terms of fusing the pipe together and getting everything to work right without leaks, I had no experience. And we were doing it in April. And April in Wyoming is a lot like weather right now, and super cold and snowy. And so the week that we decided to do it, it was 32 all week and it was a blizzard. So that automatically caused a lot of problems in terms of fusing the pipe. And we ended up burying the entire irrigation system with the farm hydrants in place. And I had fused them together with a special tool that heats the pipe up and fuses it together that I had never used before. And we buried it before actually having our well drilled and our well pump in place. So we had no idea if there was any leaks. So by the time I got my well drilled in July and the pump set up in our wash pack building, I found out immediately that there was tons of leaks in the system because it wasn't holding pressure, which was pretty soul crushing because the process of doing this was one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life. And what ended up happening was the first really bad leak surfaced in September. We were still able to irrigate pretty well just because the pump was so powerful, but the first leak surfaced. So we had the leak starting 6 feet underground, just below my feet, and then it surfaced by September and there was a nice pool of water there. So I knew where the leak was. So I turned off the water and I hand dug a 6 foot deep hole to fix it, which is also something I would never recommend you do. But I did it because I didn't know any better. And I had a buddy help me fix the pipe and we ended up getting the system working a little bit better. And then 2 years later, we had another leak surface right where this current greenhouse is. And I used an excavator that time to dig a hole and fix that leak. So the lesson here is if you're ever gonna do underground plumbing for your farm, if you live in a cold environment where you want the pipe to be below frost line, like we have to in Wyoming, because our frost line goes down 5.5 feet, you really want to have a pro involved if you don't have experience fusing pipe and stuff like that, because that costs a lot of money to fix later. And you also really want to check to make sure the whole system doesn't have leaks before you rebury it. So obviously I know that next time I start a farm, I will not do it that way. So that's the lesson here. And if this is hitting home for you, drop your top farm failure in the comments below, because the more we all share our failures, the more we can all learn from each other and become better farmers. So I live near a lot of large scale farming that does use broadcast herbicide. And there's sometimes crop dusters and big broadcast sprayers being used on these farms. And so in 2023, I had planted tomatoes in this greenhouse. I planted 5 rows and I had them grow really well for the first month, and they got about waist high, about this high, and they looked gorgeous. No problems at all, totally green, very healthy. And then around June, I started to notice that there was these leaves starting to curl at the growth tip. And if you've ever grown tomatoes before, any kind of sickliness at the growth tip where the center of the plant is growing is usually a really bad sign. And it started small, and every day it got worse. And the worst curling happened right by this door behind me. And so I took a bunch of photos, went on the internet, tried to figure out what was going on, and it was clearly herbicide contamination of some kind. And the worst of it was all by this door. The stuff on the other end was much less affected. But since we have fans in here, the air did circulate, and it definitely did all get contaminated with herbicide drift. And I am fairly confident that came from a nearby farm. And it doesn't happen every year, so I'm fairly confident that it was from a nearby farm. We have winds coming from the north, so when the wind comes from the north, it's gonna blow through this door, and that herbicide can drift for a couple of miles. It's definitely possible. So it was a soul-crushing experience just to that point. And then the plants kept growing, but kind of sickly, and sort of started to produce fruit. But then slowly but surely, by about July, one by one, each plant started just shriveling up and dying. And I later found out what that was was a secondary problem from the drift. It was a soil-borne disease that stays in the ground for a couple years. And I don't even remember the name of the disease. There's a lot of soil-borne diseases with tomatoes, but apparently I got a lab to test these plants, and it's something that comes in potting soil. So you have to make sure you sanitize all of your pots for tomatoes to avoid it. And so the next year when I planted tomatoes in the same spot, a lot of them got this soil-borne disease. It wasn't quite as bad as the year before, but I still lost about 30 or 40 tomato plants, which with greenhouse growing tomato plants, that's a lot of money. So the first year we lost thousands of dollars in crops. We basically had almost no tomatoes from this greenhouse, which is not only a huge upfront cost because we paid for all the seeds, soil, and all that stuff, but the opportunity cost of not having tomatoes to sell was thousands of dollars. It was one of the most soul-crushing things on the farm for me. And so what I've learned since then is, unfortunately, there are a lot of things in farming that are just flat out of your control. And this herbicide drift thing is something that I can't control. I can't control what other people do with their land. And that's a whole nother conversation on the moral compass with herbicides. Obviously, we don't use them on my farm, but I do understand why big farms have to use them, because I don't know how I would manage weeds on 500 acres. But in my opinion, I think there needs to be some kind of management or enforcement of how they're using them, because if you're able to cause drift 2 miles away to another farm like me, which actually costs real money, that's a problem. But that's a whole nother conversation. So the lesson here is there's a lot of things out of your control with farming, and I've learned that lesson hundreds of times. And then with soil-borne diseases, what you can do is you can move crops like tomatoes into another growing space for a year or two and let that disease wear itself out, and then you can replant in the same spot. We did that this year. So we're talking 2 years after this initial herbicide invasion, and we had no soil-borne disease for the most part. We had a little bit of other blights and stuff like that, but it was a much more successful crop in this greenhouse, and we basically just moved the tomatoes from these 5 rows behind me to the 4 rows that are closer to the camera. And that worked really well. So soil-borne disease is something you can navigate. It's really painful for sure. And then we also sanitize all of our tomato pots in the spring with a little bit of bleach. And that seems to have worked. With this kind of stuff, I don't always know what's working and what's not, and it probably is going to take me another couple years to know for sure what I'm saying, but it did work for us this year. That's all I could say. So that's one way to navigate soil-borne disease if you have it, but you do have to accept that there are just things outside of your control with farming. So this next failure brings us to the present day and involves this nice bed of thistle you see behind me. So in 2023, right before I built these 2 cat tunnels, we tilled the ground, and all I did to kill the existing grass and plant life was I used a blade on a bobcat, and I cut about 6 inches into the ground, and I flipped a bunch of the top layer upside down, and I hoped that the sun would kill all of the plant material over a couple of days, and then I came back later and tilled it. And so the first year or two of growing in these tunnels, we didn't really have any problems with grass and bindweed and thistle too much. There was little patches, but we were still pretty much able to keep all 20 beds in production. But then last summer, I started noticing little patches of bindweed and thistle popping up all over the place in these 2 tunnels, and grass growing a lot worse. And then by basically the spring of this year in 2025, the bindweed started basically covering the entire area you see behind me, and the thistle here just exploded. So it basically made it so all of these beds in here are unplantable, because the bindweed and thistle, you cannot kill by just pulling. You have to smother them of light over a long period of time, and I didn't plan for that when I did these. So I tried to get away with it. I know you're supposed to cover the land with plastic for a year, but I tried to get away without it, and that was a big mistake, because now we have 2 tunnels that are basically ungrowable. So the moral of this story is, if you are going to break new ground, you have to kill the existing plant life before you start tilling or doing whatever you're going to do, or you have to have some kind of method for smothering the existing plant life of light. So what we did on the second high tunnel that we just finished this year is I covered that entire area with black tarp, which is just basically silage tarp. You could buy it at places like Farmer's Friend or Johnny's, and you buy it for the footprint of whatever you're going to use as your new land, and you have to cover that land for at least 12 months. And I'm thinking more like 18 will be better, because I did that and it killed almost everything for me, but we still have bindweed growing in the perimeter there, which is bad. So the bindweed will just have such long roots underneath the ground that can go for 30 feet in either direction, that to kill it effectively, you probably need longer than 12 months. So that kind of sucks when you want to make money from your land. So what we're gonna do in these 2 new tunnels is we are going to use the no-dig deep mulch system in these 2 tunnels. So that's what we're gonna do to kill this and keep the ground planted with crops. And so what we're gonna do is lay out cardboard, and then we're gonna put cardboard on every square foot of land in both of these tunnels, or builder's paper. And then we're gonna layer 6 inches of compost in every single bed you see behind me, and then wood chips in the 10-inch pathways, 6 inches deep. So that 6 inches of material and the cardboard will slow the growth of these weeds. They're still gonna probably grow through, and then what we'll do is we'll keep pulling them for at least a year or 2 as they surface through that 6 inches of material over time, and eventually they will die. And I've done this a little bit on a small scale, and it does work pretty well. I'm sure it's not gonna be perfect right away, but that will eventually kill things like thistle and bindweed, hopefully. So that's the moral of the story here, is you've gotta make sure your land is clear of grass and bindweed, thistle before you start tilling it and working it, because that's just gonna be a problem that is going to get worse and worse over time. And it takes a little bit of time. It's not like instant. So you wanna make sure that land is a blank slate when you plant it. All right, if you're watching this and you don't want to experience the bindweed and thistle failure that I talked about in this video, grab my free Backyard Farm Launchpad at the link in the description below. It's a complete step-by-step process for how to set up a no-dig farm on your land and go from I don't know what I'm doing to $20,000 in production your first year on just a 1/4 acre. So grab that at the link below. If you got any value from this video and learning from my failures, can you do me a favor and like this video and share it with anybody else that needs to hear it? It really helps me reach more people who want to learn how to farm. If you're serious about starting a farm or scaling your existing one, watch this video about the 12 things I wish I knew before I started mine. I think it'll help you avoid a lot more mistakes. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.